He didn't fall on a battlefield. He fell in a room filled with the people he trusted most, the men he forgave, the men he elevated, the men he called brothers. Julius Caesar, the conqueror of nations, wasn't defeated by an army. He was defeated by mercy. He had seen betrayal before. He had crushed revolts, silenced enemies, even spared lives. But this time, the knives came from behind smiles. Cassius, Brutus, friends who once swore loyalty at his table. And when the blade struck, Caesar didn't fight back. He didn't scream. He just stared at Brutus and whispered the words that would echo through time. Et tu, Brute? That wasn't surprise. That was recognition. Because deep down, he knew. He had seen the signs. He had felt the shift in their eyes, the silence in their respect. But he ignored it. He forgave it. He called it politics. He called it brotherhood. He called it peace. And that's how forgiveness kills, not with kindness, but with blindness. Caesar didn't die because he was weak. He died because he believed loyalty could outlive self-interest. He believed people would choose memory over ambition. He believed in hearts that had already changed. And that is the tragedy we all repeat every time we keep forgiving people who already know what they are doing. So before you give someone another chance, before you excuse what your instincts already called betrayal, ask yourself, would you rather be loved for your mercy or respected for your boundaries? Because forgiveness may feel divine, but in the wrong hands, it's a weapon aimed at you. Watch till the end. You'll understand why Caesar's last mistake is still the one most of us keep making. We all like to think forgiveness makes us noble. We tell ourselves it's strength, that it's divine, that it sets us free. But here's the thing, most people don't forgive out of strength. They forgive out of exhaustion. They forgive because confrontation scares them more than being hurt again. They forgive because silence feels safer than war. When someone betrays you and you say, "It's okay," you're not healing. You're negotiating with your own self-respect. We love to believe people didn't mean it, that maybe they were lost, hurt, or didn't know better. But they do. People know exactly what they are doing, especially when it hurts you. The coworker who takes credit for your work? They didn't accidentally forget your name in the meeting. The friend who betrays your secret? They didn't slip. They tested your boundaries and learned you don't enforce them. The lover who keeps crossing lines, apologizing and repeating? That's not confusion. That's calculation. Every time you excuse it, you teach them the price of hurting you is a sorry, and that's cheap currency. Here's what forgiveness has become today. A bandage for cowardice. We use it to cover wounds we're too afraid to clean. Think about it. You forgive your boss for humiliating you in front of the team. You forgive a friend for ghosting you when you needed them most. You forgive a partner for betraying your trust again. And you call it growth. But sometimes forgiveness isn't growth. It's self-abandonment dressed in spirituality. Because forgiveness without accountability isn't peace. It's permission. And permission always comes with a price, usually your dignity. Now don't get me wrong, forgiveness can be powerful. But only when it's conscious. Only when it's earned. Not when it's begged out of guilt or loneliness. Let's break it down. Forgiveness without awareness is how manipulators survive. They rely on your memory being soft. They rely on your empathy being endless. They rely on your fear of conflict being stronger than your will to walk away. That's why the same faces keep showing up in your story. Different names, same patterns. Because they've learned you'll forgive them. The truth is, forgiveness is only noble when it's your choice, not your reflex. You don't owe anyone peace who profits from your pain. So before you forgive again, ask yourself, am I forgiving them to free myself, or because I'm too afraid to face who they really are? Because the mask of forgiveness might make you look kind, but it also makes you blind. Let's go deeper. Because this isn't just about forgiveness, it's about how people study your empathy like a map and use it to navigate your mind. Every manipulator begins with one experiment. How much can I get away with? It starts small. They show up late, break a promise, twist your words a little. You sigh, tell them it's fine. They smile not with gratitude, but recognition. You've just revealed your threshold for pain. The first betrayal is never about the act. It's about the reaction. They watch what you tolerate. They test your silence. They measure how quickly you rush to smooth things over. Forgiveness to them isn't love. It's data. They collect it, they file it, they use it later. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most manipulation doesn't happen in the shadows. It happens in daylight through charm, pity, and subtle guilt. The most dangerous people in your life aren't the ones who yell or threaten. They're the ones who make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. Ever noticed how some people apologize too well? How their remorse feels rehearsed, like they've done this performance before? That's because they have. They've mastered emotional theater. They'll say, "I didn't mean it," and you'll believe them, because your empathy demands an audience. You want to believe people are better than their actions. But sometimes, the difference between good intentions and manipulation is simply who benefits from your forgiveness. Let's take a lesson from history. Niccolò Machiavelli, the political philosopher who understood the human soul not through compassion, but through power. In The Prince, he said something most people ignore. If you must harm someone, harm them in such a way that you need not fear their revenge. It's brutal, but it's honest. He understood the psychology of forgiveness before psychology even had a name. Machiavelli knew that people rarely forgive out of mercy, they forgive out of strategy. And those who understand this truth control those who don't. Forgiveness in his eyes was not a virtue, it was a tactic. A ruler who forgives without consequence looks weak. A ruler who forgives after establishing fear looks divine. That's the secret every manipulator knows intuitively. They play the game Machiavelli wrote, and you play the fairy tale you were raised with. Now let's step into the court of Queen Elizabeth I. Surrounded by men who wanted her throne, advisors who whispered lies, and a half-sister who once tried to kill her. Yet she ruled for 45 years. Elizabeth forgave often, but never blindly. When she pardoned her enemies, she did it under two conditions. They never forgot who held power, and they never got close enough to test it again. She understood forgiveness as performance, a display of control, not surrender. It wasn't "I forgive you because I'm kind." It was "I forgive you because you no longer matter." That's what modern forgiveness has lost the discipline of discernment. Today, we call people cold when they protect their boundaries. We call them kind when they let others step on them. But Elizabeth, Machiavelli, and every great strategist knew something you've forgotten. Forgiveness is not a spiritual reflex, it's an emotional transaction. You can forgive, yes, but you must decide the price. And sometimes the price is distance. Let's bring this closer to home. Think of your workplace. That colleague who constantly interrupts you in meetings. The manager who takes your ideas and repackages them as his own. You stay silent. Tell yourself it's not worth the fight. But the truth? You're training them. You're teaching them that your brilliance is free, that your time is negotiable, that your peace is disposable. And in your personal life, it's the same pattern. The friend who always needs you but is never there when you fall. The partner who apologizes, then repeats. The family member who says, "You've changed," whenever you stop enabling them. They're not confused. They're consistent. They've learned that your empathy has no expiration date. Every manipulator thrives on repetition. They feed off patterns. And if you've ever wondered why the same kind of people keep showing up in your life, it's because you haven't rewritten the script. You keep forgiving the actor and blaming the role. The psychology of manipulation is built on two pillars: guilt and hope. Guilt makes you afraid of being mean. Hope makes you believe this time it'll be different. And together, they form the perfect cage. Let's talk about guilt. Most manipulators are fluent in emotional language. They know how to twist it. They'll say, "After everything I've done for you," or "You're really not going to forgive me?" They make you the villain for setting boundaries. Then comes hope. They feed you crumbs of change, a promise, a gesture, a moment of softness, just enough to reset your patience. You tell yourself, maybe they're growing. But they're not growing. They're gardening your weakness. Every act of kind forgiveness becomes another season of your exploitation. That's why true strength isn't in forgiving fast. It's in observing slowly. Because the right person doesn't need your forgiveness 10 times. They learn after one. Now look at the most successful manipulators in history. They all share one skill: reading empathy. From courtrooms to boardrooms, from monarchs to modern CEOs, Those who win understand that the heart is predictable. People want to be seen as good, fair, forgiving, and manipulators weaponize that. Andrew Carnegie once said he could judge a man's weakness by how quickly he tried to prove he wasn't angry. Because anger, when clean, is power. But suppressed anger becomes manipulation fuel for someone else. The moment you rush to forgive, you give your enemy a blueprint to repeat the offense. And here's where the psychology completes its circle. Forgiveness without consequence tells the other person who you wish they were. But boundaries reveal who they actually are. Machiavelli saw it in politics. Elizabeth saw it in her court. You can see it in your daily life if you were brave enough to stop lying to yourself. So, when someone hurts you and says, "I'm sorry," don't just listen to the words. Watch what they do after the apology. Do they rush to comfort you, or do they wait to see if you'll comfort them? That small difference tells you everything. Because people who truly regret will carry the weight of their actions. The rest will hand it back to you and call it closure. And that's when you must stop being so forgiving, not because you hate them, but because you finally love your peace more than their patterns. Every person who wakes up from blind forgiveness remembers one moment, the day they finally saw the pattern. Not the event, not the betrayal itself, but the rhythm behind it. The same kind of people, the same kind of words, the same kind of endings. It's like watching your life repeat with different faces. You start to realize something horrifying. It wasn't just bad luck, it was training. You were trained to confuse tolerance with wisdom, to believe that peace means avoiding conflict, to think forgiveness makes you higher, purer, more evolved. But all it really did was make you predictable. Let's walk into history. Because it has a cruel way of repeating the same lessons in different costumes. Take Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome. He built his empire through cunning deals, silver mines, and political alliances. Yet, for all his wealth, Crassus had one fatal flaw: ego, wrapped in mercy. He believed that money could buy loyalty, that forgiving betrayal could secure devotion. When his ally Cassius betrayed him, Crassus forgave him publicly to look noble before the Senate. But privately, Cassius used that mercy to undermine him again, leaking his military plans to rivals. When Crassus finally marched east to conquer Parthia, his army was destroyed not by the enemy first, but by his own men's divided loyalty. Forgiveness became the crack through which Rome's richest man fell. Because here's the truth. If someone betrays you and you forgive them without consequence, you don't look strong, you look available. And the world always preys on what looks available. History doesn't remember Crassus for his mercy. It remembers him for his downfall, molten gold poured into his mouth by the Parthians, a final mockery of his greed and misplaced trust. That's the cost of confusing control for compassion. Now move forward a few thousand miles to Stalin's inner circle. A world built on paranoia, loyalty, and performance. Men like Beria, Yezhov, and Molotov weren't just politicians, they were shadows watching each other breathe. Forgiveness didn't exist there, not because it was evil, but because it was suicidal. Stalin learned early that forgiveness in politics was an open door for betrayal. He saw what mercy did to the czars before him. He saw how leaders who spared their rivals ended up buried by them. So he turned forgiveness into an illusion. He'd pardon a man one day and purge him the next. Twisted, yes. But it carried a brutal psychological truth. When you forgive those who seek your throne, they don't kneel, they reload. Now you might say, but that's politics. My life isn't that extreme. You're right, your life isn't a dictatorship. But human nature doesn't change with uniforms. Every workplace, every relationship, every family has its own version of the court. There are power games, hidden motives, and unspoken rules. And just like in Stalin's circle, forgiveness can be weaponized to test your weakness. When you say it's okay too many times, you teach people that access to you doesn't require respect, just familiarity. They don't have to fear losing you, because they never do. Here's the turning point. You stop thinking forgiveness is a moral high ground and start seeing it as an energy exchange. Every time you forgive, you give away energy, focus, time, peace. Ask yourself, are you giving it to someone who builds you or someone who bleeds you? Now let's visit Catherine the Great, a woman who ruled an empire in an age where women weren't even trusted to rule their homes. Her story is the opposite of Crassus. She understood betrayal not as tragedy, but as a mirror of power. When her husband, Tsar Peter III, humiliated her publicly and plotted against her, Catherine didn't cry or forgive. She studied. She waited. She gathered allies quietly, moved pieces carefully, and struck once cleanly, decisively. When she took the throne, she didn't forgive her husband's conspirators. She neutralized them. Some she banished, some she rewarded with silence, the cruelest form of dismissal. Catherine knew something most people never learn. You don't have to punish everyone who hurts you sometimes. The most powerful revenge is exclusion. To forgive is to release them from your heart. To forget them strategically is to release them from your world. Her empire didn't grow through mercy, it grew through mastery. Because she understood that compassion without boundaries creates chaos. That's your turning point too. The moment you stop being the one who always understands, always absorbs, always forgives. The moment you realize you don't owe everyone access to your soul. The danger isn't in being kind. The danger is believing kindness should be unconditional. Let's bring this back to real life. Picture the friend who constantly lets you down. They promise to show up, then vanish. You forgive them every time, thinking you're being understanding. But notice what happens. They grow comfortable in their inconsistency. Because your forgiveness has no cost. Or the partner who says, "I'm sorry, I'll change," then repeats the same behavior, just in smaller doses. You forgive again, not because you believe them, but because you're tired of fighting. And that's how forgiveness turns into fatigue. The pattern always ends the same. They get better at apologizing, and you get worse at noticing manipulation. So here's what awakening looks like. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's that moment when you hear another apology and feel nothing. No anger, no hope, just clarity. You finally understand. Forgiveness isn't healing when it keeps the wound open. When Crassus forgave Cassius, he lost Rome's respect. When Stalin pretended to forgive, he lost his soul. But when Catherine refused to, she gained an empire. That's the spectrum of power. Between naive mercy and ruthless control lies wisdom discernment, the ability to see through people's patterns without needing to hate them. Forgiveness without awareness keeps you chained. Awareness without forgiveness makes you bitter. But awareness with boundaries, that's liberation. Because the truth is, people who truly care will never make you prove your patience twice. Only those who feed on it will demand your forgiveness endlessly. You have to decide. Do you want peace, or do you want to keep pretending the people who hurt you will change? Because sometimes peace doesn't come from forgiving others, it comes from forgiving yourself for letting it go on this long. That's where the fire starts to burn again. The kind that doesn't destroy but cleanses. It burns away the guilt, the need to please, the urge to be endlessly forgiving. And what's left isn't coldness, it's power. Because true power isn't about holding grudges, it's about holding standards. You don't have to punish anyone. Just stop participating in their game. Stop returning to the scene of your own betrayal. Stop calling it forgiveness when it's really fear. Crassus learned too late. Stalin never learned at all. Catherine mastered it. Now it's your turn. There's a silence that comes before power returns. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It asks that moment you finally stop explaining your worth to people who already know it and still choose to ignore it. Something changes in you. The same words that once broke you now sound hollow. The same apologies that used to melt you now feel rehearsed. You've heard it all before, and this time your body refuses to participate. That's when you realize forgiveness isn't the cure, awareness is. Forgiveness without awareness is self-deception. Awareness without forgiveness is rage. But awareness with boundaries, that's rebirth. When you stop forgiving out of fear, your world begins to reorder itself. People sense it. The manipulators retreat. The genuine ones lean closer. And you begin to breathe differently. Because for the first time in your life, you're not trying to be the good one. You're trying to be the true one. Let's paint the picture. You're in the workplace. For years, you've been the dependable one. The one who stays late when others leave early. The one who picks up extra tasks when someone forgets. You forgive every slight, every oversight because you think patience will be noticed. It never is. And then one day, your boss credits someone else for your project again, and instead of swallowing the humiliation, something inside you snaps clean. Not in anger, in clarity. You don't yell. You don't send passive-aggressive emails. You simply say, "Actually, that was my work," and let the silence do the rest. You'll notice something strange. People who were comfortable dismissing you suddenly start choosing their words carefully. Because respect, once demanded, changes the entire energy of a room. Forgiveness never earned you respect, boundaries did. Now imagine the same shift in your personal life. The friend who always cancels last minute. The partner who keeps apologizing but never changes. The family member who keeps saying, "You've changed," every time you choose peace over people-pleasing. Before, you would justify, explain, smooth it over. Now, you don't. You say, "You're right, I have changed," and you mean it. Because here's the truth. Growth looks like distance to those who benefit from your stagnation. They'll call you selfish, cold, arrogant. But that's just projection. You're not colder. You're clearer. The fire that returns isn't rage. It's recognition. Recognition of who you were before you started apologizing for existing. Let's talk about what happens inside your mind when this shift begins. At first, it feels wrong. You feel guilty for saying no. You overthink your silence. You wonder if you're becoming the very thing you used to hate. That's the withdrawal phase of emotional addiction, because being the forgiver gives you identity, the bigger person, the calm one, the peacemaker. When you stop, the ego panics. It says, "If I don't forgive, who am I?" And the answer hits you slowly. You are someone who no longer trades peace for acceptance. The first few weeks feel lonely. You'll lose people. Not because you're unkind, but because your silence reveals who was only there for the access, not the connection. It's like resetting your nervous system. For years, your empathy was in overdrive, scanning for who needed saving. Now, you redirect it inward. That's when your creativity returns, your energy, your self-respect. You stop chasing closure because you realize closure is just the story people tell themselves when they don't want to admit it. It's over. And here's the paradox. When you stop forgiving too easily, your love actually becomes purer. Because it's no longer polluted by fear. You no longer love to be loved back. You love because it's who you are, and you protect that love like a king guards his crown. The fire that returns is ancient. It's the same fire that made Catherine the Great refuse humiliation. The same fire Marcus Aurelius spoke of when he said, "What stands in the way becomes the way." It's the inner heat that burns illusion, not people. But let's be real, people around you won't understand it at first. They'll mistake your calm for pride, your silence for distance, your focus for ego, because they were comfortable with your weakness, not your strength. You'll start to see manipulation with X-ray vision. When someone says, "You've changed," you'll hear, "You're no longer easy to control." When someone says, "Don't be so harsh," you'll hear, "I miss the version of you that tolerated me." And when someone says, "Forgive and forget," you'll hear, "Let me back in without earning it." That's when you know you've crossed the bridge. You've become someone who remembers everything but chooses differently. Let's look at a real-world mirror. There's a woman named Elisa who worked at a design firm for 10 years. She was everyone's favorite. The helper, the listener, the peacekeeper. She forgave every slight late payments, rude remarks, broken promises. She told herself she was being patient, until one day the company laid her off without notice, the same company she had saved countless times. 2 years later, she started her own design studio. When her old boss tried to hire her services, she replied, "My rate is triple what it used to be. No anger, no revenge, just self-valuation. That's the fire returning. When you stop begging to be seen and start charging for the light you bring." Another example, a man named Rohan, who kept forgiving his brother for borrowing money and never returning it. Every time the brother said, "I'll pay you next month," and Rohan forgave him 10 times. Until one day he didn't. He said no. And suddenly his brother stopped calling. Painful? Yes. But what left wasn't family, it was a pattern. And patterns are meant to be broken. That's what fire does, it purifies. It burns what no longer serves the structure, so the foundation can breathe again. When you stop forgiving out of weakness, you don't become cruel. You become selective. Selective with your energy, your empathy, your access. You stop explaining your boundaries because you realize they're not walls, they're gates. And gates don't apologize for being closed to trespassers. Here's something most people don't talk about. When you stop forgiving everyone, you start attracting a different kind of person, people who respect the word no. People who value consistency over charm. People who aren't threatened by silence. Because like energy attracts like energy. Weak forgiveness invites predators. Strong boundaries invite peers. The fire that returns doesn't destroy your softness, it protects it. It teaches you that not everyone deserves access to your gentleness. In a world that tells you to be endlessly forgiving, it takes courage to say, enough. Not out of bitterness, but out of truth. Because love without limits breeds dependency, and forgiveness without discernment breeds disrespect. The moment you understand that, you stop playing savior and start walking as your own protector. That's what the return of fire feels like: quiet confidence, clarity without cruelty, peace without pretending. You don't raise your voice anymore, you raise your standards. And suddenly, the same world that once drained you starts orbiting differently because you've become the sun again. There comes a moment when the noise finally fades. When every apology, every manipulation, every plea for another chance loses its power. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You simply exist with a calm that feels like armor, forged in silence. That's the return to self. For years, you thought forgiveness was love. You thought letting go meant healing. You thought turning the other cheek made you strong. But now you see sometimes turning the other cheek just gives someone another target. True peace doesn't come from forgiving everyone. It comes from forgiving yourself for mistaking endurance for love. You look back at all the times you let things slide. You remember the smiles that didn't reach their eyes, the "I didn't mean it" that meant exactly what it sounded like. And you don't feel hatred anymore. You feel understanding. Because you finally see the truth. They weren't the problem, your tolerance was. That realization stings. It feels like standing in the aftermath of your own leniency. But beneath that sting lies freedom. Because once you understand your part in your own suffering, you can end it. You start living differently. You stop chasing explanations. You stop seeking validation from people who depend on your confusion. You no longer confuse stillness with passivity. You no longer confuse forgiveness with weakness. You start treating your energy like currency because it is. You spend it wisely. You invest it in people who mirror your respect. You save it from those who only borrow it to escape accountability. You begin to realize forgiveness isn't a gift for everyone. It's a ceremony for closure. It's not an invitation back into your life. It's the final word in a language you no longer need to speak. That's what healing really means. Not forgiving so you can let them stay, forgiving so you can let yourself leave. And once you do, something unexpected happens. Your world becomes quieter but not emptier. You have fewer people around you but more truth in every interaction. You stop being the caretaker of everyone's emotions and start becoming the guardian of your own. That's the paradox of awakening. You become more compassionate but less available. Because compassion without boundaries is self-betrayal, and you've already lived that chapter. Think about Catherine the Great again. When she finally took the throne, she didn't apologize for her rise. She didn't send letters of forgiveness to those who betrayed her. She simply ruled. In silence, with power, with clarity. That's what it looks like when someone stops asking permission to exist. You can do the same. You don't need a crown to reclaim your kingdom. You just need to stop kneeling before the wrong people. Here's what true peace looks like in the real world. You walk into work and the same chaos unfolds: gossip, politics, subtle jabs, but it doesn't touch you anymore. Because you've stopped seeking fairness from unfair people. You've stopped expecting loyalty from the disloyal. You've stopped being shocked by what's already predictable. Your calm becomes unsettling to those who fed on your reactions. They'll poke at you, test you, try to resurrect the old you. But they can't. Because that version of you doesn't live here anymore. The same applies in your relationships. The person who used to drain you calls again, and you don't answer, not out of spite, but out of peace. You realize silence is an answer. And sometimes it's the most powerful one. You no longer write long messages trying to make them understand. You no longer chase closure through endless conversations. Because you've learned closure is what happens inside you the moment you accept they'll never understand. And that's okay. Forgiveness once meant returning to harmony with others. Now it means returning to harmony with yourself. You stop replaying the past because you see it differently now. Those people who hurt you weren't devils, they were teachers. Unpaid, uninvited, but teachers nonetheless. They taught you where your boundaries were too thin. They taught you how easily empathy turns into a leash. They taught you that love without self-respect is just dependency with better lighting. You don't thank them out loud. You don't glorify the pain, but quietly, deep inside, you acknowledge, without them, you'd still be asleep. That's the return to self, the merging of your softness and your strength. You stop choosing between being kind and being respected. You become both. You learn that you can care deeply and still walk away when care isn't returned. You learn that boundaries don't ruin relationships, they reveal them. The ones who truly see you won't need to be forgiven constantly. They'll meet you where you stand with honesty, effort, and peace. The ones who don't will fade, like echoes in a hallway you no longer walk through. You start living lighter, not because the world is easier, but because you're no longer carrying the weight of everyone else's excuses. Your mornings feel different. You wake up not bracing for impact, but ready for creation. You pour your energy into things that grow you, not drain you. This is what real forgiveness was meant to be, not a favor to others, but a liberation for yourself. You forgive not to restore the past, but to reclaim the present. You forgive not to prove your goodness, but to protect your peace. And in that peace, something beautiful happens. You start remembering who you were, before life taught you to shrink, before you became the caretaker, before you started apologizing for your own light. That's the real victory. Not revenge, not dominance, just return. You walk differently now, slower, steadier, grounded. You speak less, but every word carries weight. You give less, but every act carries intention. You no longer confuse forgiveness with surrender. You no longer confuse love with loss. You've learned the lesson the hard way, the only way that ever truly lasts. Because once you stop forgiving blindly, you don't lose your empathy, you refine it. You don't harden your heart, you strengthen your spine. You don't close off to love, you open up to truth. And in that truth, you find something sacred. You are no longer the one who gets drained, used, or misunderstood. You are the mirror that shows people who they really are. You are the quiet force that walks away without guilt. You are the peace others pretend to have, but you've earned. That's what power looks like, not in noise, but in knowing. And when someone asks you now, why don't you forgive like you used to? You'll smile and say, I still do. I just don't forget what I learned. That's the full circle. That's awakening. That's you returning home to yourself. Maybe Caesar's story isn't just history. Maybe it's prophecy, one that keeps repeating in smaller ways inside every life that forgives too easily. He didn't lose because he trusted. He lost because he knew and still chose to ignore what he knew. That's the line we all walk. Between love and illusion. Between awareness and denial. Between saying they wouldn't do that to me and watching them do it again. Every one of us has had our own Brutus, someone we protected, defended, excused until the knife came down and the truth finally stood naked. But here's the twist. You don't have to die on your Senate floor. You don't have to be remembered for your mercy. You can choose differently. You can let that betrayal become your coronation. The moment you stop handing out forgiveness to people who weaponize it. Caesar's fall was physical. Yours doesn't have to be. You can rise instead, not by becoming cruel, but by becoming clear. You can lead your own empire, your mind, your peace, your energy, without needing to prove your goodness to anyone. Because at some point, you have to stop waiting for people to understand your heart and start protecting it like it's a crown, so when they ask, aren't you going to forgive? You can smile and say, I already did. I just didn't forget what I learned. That's how legends are reborn, not in the forgiveness they give, but in the boundaries they finally keep. And maybe that's the real story Caesar never lived to tell, but you still can. Watch this again when you start doubting yourself, because mercy without awareness ends empires. But awareness with boundaries, that builds them.